Wrath, the 7 Deadly Sins. Written by Christian Vandergroot. Narrated by Joseph D. Weaver. Preface. Note: throughout this and other books, I will quote the King James Version of the Bible. Please listen to the Holy Spirit, and if you do, then you will comprehend the message I try to bring across, because of or despite the version and or translation of the Bible that I am using. The 7 Deadly Sins and 7 Heavenly Virtues were adopted by the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Whether you're part of Catholicism or some other Christian denomination, or if you don't attend church but you study the Holy Scriptures on your own, we can acquire these Christ-like traits and continue developing them throughout our lives. In these books, I will explain more about each sin and virtue, and the origins, psychology, biblical references, manifestations, and consequences of them. Here is a list of all the books in this series. They are all available on Amazon, both as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks. 7 Deadly Sins: Lust. 7 Deadly Sins: Gluttony. 7 Deadly Sins: Greed. 7 Deadly Sins: Sloth. 7 Deadly Sins: Wrath. 7 Deadly Sins: Envy. 7 Deadly Sins: Pride. 7 Heavenly Virtues: Chastity. 7 Heavenly Virtues: Temperance. 7 Heavenly Virtues: Charity. 7 Heavenly Virtues: Diligence. 7 Heavenly Virtues: Forgiveness. 7 Heavenly Virtues: Kindness. 7 Heavenly Virtues: Humility. Chapter 1. Slow to Anger. In Proverbs 16:32, it reads, "He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city." Proverbs 16:32. In Ecclesiastes 7 verse 9, it reads, "Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools." Also, in the New Testament, we can read in Ephesians 4:26 and 27, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you, with all malice." Wrath is often defined as uncontrolled temper, anger, or rage. Sometimes even hatred or vengeance can be associated with the same word. It can come in the form of violence, feuds, acts of revenge, getting even, or even the simplest form of impatience, and it can ultimately lead to self-destructive behavior as well. A definition of wrath formed by the Catholic Church has been that anger becomes wrath when it is directed against someone who is innocent, when it's extremely strong or doesn't seem to go away, or when it is a desire for excessive punishment. Hatred is often the cause of wrath, and hatred can be described as the desire to make someone else suffer or experience a certain misfortune. When someone desires grave harm to someone else, it can be considered a mortal sin, as indicated by the Catholic Church. Typically, people feel angry when they or someone they care about experiences a feeling of resentment or feels offended. Seeing the nature of anger, it can be controlled and not be considered as sinful as other mortal sins, if feelings are controlled and not acted upon. In those cases, anger can be considered a natural feeling of noticing that someone crossed your boundaries and refusing to accept that. However, some people's boundaries are so out of control that the smallest thing can trigger a feeling of being offended. That's when things can start to get out of control. Dante described vengeance, for example, as a love of justice perverted to revenge and spite. I clearly remember discussions I've had about this with others. The difference between a longing for justice and revenge. Justice seeks to set things right and restore the balance. Revenge is usually based on an emotional trigger that causes a person to desire another to suffer and feel hurt because the first has been hurt himself. Henry Edward has stated that angry people are slaves to themselves. They cannot go through life finding fulfillment without having seen a score settled. Their feelings of fairness have been breached, and they are more prone to take situations to the extreme. Wrath, or anger, is an intense, emotional, uncomfortable reaction. The irony of life, however, is that sometimes personal boundaries are justified and right, and the violation of them is a serious issue, but that where people feel boundaries should be, and where they really should be according to God, are two completely different things. Can we truly figure out where God puts the boundaries, or will we continue to pridefully determine our own terms and conditions of human behavior? That is the question. Anger management has been a topic for ages, indicating that managing feelings is the most important aspect, not suppressing them. We will go more into that in a later chapter. Heart rates increase, the blood pressure goes up, adrenaline and noradrenaline levels rise, and the fight or flight panic response in our human instincts is triggered. Anger is never a first emotion. It is always a second emotion. Someone who knows the future will be okay, will not jump into a rage. They will be calm. Someone who hasn't been hurt by anyone and has always been treated right will never show anger. Fear, worry, and sadness are the primary emotions in our mind. So when you cannot figure out why you are frustrated or angry, look for the loss, the sadness, or the fear. When people express anger, their facial expressions and body language change. Adrenaline is released in the brain, and acts of aggression can be triggered. In the animal kingdom, intense stares, loud sounds, and bare teeth express attempts to fend off a threat. But just like any natural instinct can be called natural, as human beings we are not animals and have the freedom to control our actions, and we should. Uncontrolled sexual feelings would cause a societal mess of rape, incest, and assaults. Uncontrolled passions or greed could lead to a chaotic mess of looting and stealing. Uncontrolled rage, similarly, can result in a world where vengeance, murder, and violence become the dominant form of interaction. None of these things, although natural, should be excused or freely expressed without a filter, a rational explanation, a pure conscience, or a sense of decency and empathy. Although many who experience the arousal of anger say it just happened to them, this does not excuse a lack of self-management and objective observability. Although a lot of philosophers have argued and warned against the impulsive fits of anger, many disagree about the intrinsic value of anger to correct action and accomplish survival. And this is why there is so much confusion. The boundaries matter and the responses matter, not just the feelings. I know of people who are always angry. It's hard to live a happy life if you're always angry. 3 types of anger, in a general sense, have been acknowledged by various psychologists, which are A. Hasty anger, which is a sudden impulse of self-preservation. A trapped animal or human being, or tormented one, will react suddenly to protect him or herself and ensure survival. B. Settled or deliberate anger is episodic as well, and is a reaction to the perceived deliberate harm or unfair treatment by others. In other words, this occurs when someone feels offended by another's misbehavior, or supposed misbehavior. Those are definitely 2 different things. C. Dispositional anger is less personal and is related to someone's personality and character, or lack thereof. This doesn't relate to instincts or threats from another person or creature, but is the result of irritability, fatigue, and sullenness. This can simply be triggered by a long, bad day, a number of factors that are frustrating, or have resulted into a significant loss, and can lead to snapping for no reason whatsoever, or so it seems, when the current situation becomes too much for someone. A positive effect, depending on what it is about, can be that it can trigger determination toward correction of wrongful behavior or promote social justice. Sometimes, when people become frustrated, they finally realize that they have to take action and no longer tolerate the circumstances that have escalated into an apparent disaster. Patience can even be triggered by anger, which is ironic and may seem contrary. On the other hand, when anger has no proper outlet, it can result into breaking valuable objects, and it can impair someone's ability to think straight and analyze a situation in an optimal way to solve the related problems. Anger is not aggression, but anger can trigger aggression. But not all aggression is triggered by anger. One can simply choose to be aggressive as show, or for different purposes without really feeling angry. Chapter 2. What triggers wrath? In a way, you could say anger is somewhat stupid. Babies don't experience anger because they are unable to detect the intentions of the people around them. Frustration can exist, which is the simple result of not getting what they want or not being able to eliminate something from their lives that they don't want. But frustration is different from anger or wrath, although they can overlap. When someone's car is damaged, for instance, they might feel angry at first and blame another for driving recklessly. But if they find out that the other person is not to blame, say, because that person got hit by another car and therefore had no control over the wheel or the brakes, anger may be directed to the other who caused that chain reaction. Then, if the same angry person finds out that the one who supposedly caused the accident just passed out behind the wheel through no fault of their own, confusion may arise. The frustration over the damaged car may still be there, but anger will diminish. It's interesting. We don't direct our anger at someone unless we think their intentions are wrong. Sometimes, when we find out that they are not, we feel embarrassed for making the wrong assumptions. Jesus said in Matthew 7, verses 1 and 2, "Judge not, that ye may not be judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again." Many of us have had enough life experience that makes us think we can perceive the intents of others, only to find out that we can be so off because there were factors we didn't take into account. An example from my own life. I worked with a colleague one time. He was the same age, and we were stuck with each other for several months, according to the demands of the project. After a while, I discovered that this person was very defensive, and that an argument would arise over comparatively insignificant reasons. One day, I asked him gently, "Why does that make you angry? You seem to get upset too easily. It's almost as if you argue over nothing. What is going on?" His answer made sense. We argue less than at home. My mom screams and yells at us, and there's a lot of blaming, bitterness, and anger in our home. I'm just used to doing it. It's a habit. I'm sorry. You can see that it's not very personal, and I just get offended too quickly sometimes, because that's what I'm used to. One of the biggest triggers of irritation is the cry of a baby or the whining of a toddler. I have 2 little children right now, and even though I love them to pieces, when they won't stop crying, it's one of the most annoying sounds in the world. God probably made it that way on purpose, so we would respond to their needs. Anger is something we often control within the walls of our own homes. We set the example for our children, and their tempers become a partial copy of what they've seen their parents do. Expectations play a major role. Psychotherapist Michael C. Graham firmly believes, for instance, that our expectations and assumptions about the world around us shape our boundaries and the actions that trigger anger in us. He states that anger is almost always the result of us expecting the world to be different than it is. Most of the time, there is no one cause for anger. Sure, there can be. But when we look at how people's frustrations build up over time and blow up over seemingly nothing, we can conclude that it's like a bucket being filled with water. That one drop at the end can make the bucket spill. When people are tired, for example, they are more vulnerable because their body isn't feeling well anymore. so they get more easily irritated and can't take much. Internal problems can cause people to lash out at others who have nothing to do with the situation. In groups and relationships, people who are angry often become more negative or have a prejudgment about outsiders. They trust people less, which can be a good or a bad thing, and they attribute good qualities less to outsiders. Unlike other negative emotions, like fear or sadness, anger is quicker to point the finger and analyzes the situation less. They typically place more blame on others for their misery. People who are angry tend to drag all other previous events into their current emotional state as well, which is triggered by the emotion itself. For example, a wife who is angry at her husband may bring up other times when the husband misbehaved and become angry again, even if they happened a long time before that and were already solved. Anger can make a person feel more desire for something. For example, a Dutch study in 2010 showed that people who were made angry and were then shown an object had more desire to possess the said object than people who were being pushed into being fearful. This makes a lot of sense because anger triggers assertiveness. However, there is still a difference between passive and aggressive anger. Let's take a look at those. Passive anger. This can be expressed in certain ways, such as giving someone the cold shoulder, a fake smile, or looking like you don't care. I've received a lot of condemning looks in my life, from people I'm sure were judging me, but they wouldn't say anything. Some people turn to substance abuse, overreacting, sleeping too much, becoming rigid, sexual practices, or they give too much time and attention to machines, objects, intellectual pursuits, or talking about frustrations without showing any feelings. Other people became evasive. They avoid conflict, don't argue back, or become phobic. Some people practice defeatism by setting themselves up for failure, picking undependable people to interact with, sexual impotence, or taking things out of context. The many expressions seem to have no end. For example, some people become obsessed with getting things tidy or clean, or on the other hand, hoarding useless junk. Some constantly check things, overeat, or overdiet. There are those who, unfortunately, know how to manipulate and aren't afraid of using that skill. They blackmail, convince, provoke anger in others, play the victim, fake illnesses, sabotage relationships, use sexual provocation, belittle others, or patronize people. Secretive behavior can also be an expression of passive anger, like the silent treatment, avoiding eye contact, gossiping, poison pen letters, stealing, or conning. Aggressive anger. Some of the most common symptoms of aggressive anger are, among others, bullying, persecuting, pushing, shouting, driving someone off the road, destroying objects, vandalism, damaging animals, abusing children, reckless driving, showing off, not being willing to delegate, being a sore loser, wanting to be the center of attention, not listening, violence, sexual abuse or rape, verbal abuse, vulgar jokes, foul language, ignoring people's feelings, discriminating, blaming, punishing people, labeling other people, manic behavior, speaking rapidly, walking too fast, reckless wasting of money, selfishness, cutting in line, threatening, scaring people, fist shaking, wearing clothes or symbols that are related to violent behavior, tailgating, blowing the car horn excessively, slamming doors, kicking objects, general accusations, unpredictability, explosive rages, raising your voice, attacking others, illogical arguments, vengeance, spitting at people, flipping people off, etc. Negative results. Anger expressions can lead to a lower productivity at work, increased stress, a ruined atmosphere, and hurtful things people say that they regret later. For the most part, improper expressions of anger have devastating effects. But there are also instances when anger expressions are advised or necessary in order to get positive results. We'll discuss those in Chapter 4. First, let's look at what happens to us in a physical way when we get angry. Chapter 3. The biological process of aggression. As briefly discussed in the first chapter, aggression can trigger a series of biological reactions. The amygdala in the brain is in control of emotions and the fight or flight response, which is rooted in the deep instincts in every human being. When threatened or experiencing fear or stress, it processes all of the information and estimates how dangerous something is in just milliseconds. Because of this, people can react first and think later. Right above the amygdala lies the frontal cortex, which triggers the ability to make decisions and weigh consequences. This part of the brain helps solve problems and analyze behavior. When we become angry, blood quickly rushes through the frontal cortex and clouds rational thinking. Additionally, the adrenal glands are filled with stress hormones, adrenaline, and in particular, cortisol. But strangely enough, the general production of cortisol seemed to decrease in people instilled with anger, according to tests. It gives you a burst of energy and some extra strength, which is one of the reasons why, depending on the situation, anger can either have good or bad effects. The blood gets redirected to the muscles in preparation of a fight. The blood pressure and pain threshold rise. Testosterone production increases. The left part of the brain gets stimulated more, breathing and heart rate increase, and the pupils start dilating. Higher levels of fatty acids and blood sugar get released to give instant energy to survive in the assumed emergency situation. If this happens too often, the fatty acids build up in the arteries, which increases the risk of heart diseases. In this sense, anger can affect your mental health and emotional well-being. If it gets triggered too often, it becomes a habit and becomes addicting. Also, a continuous trigger and effect kind of anger can confuse the hippocampus, which is the stress responder in the brain. This, in turn, results in the inability to suppress anger responses in general. Anger also disrupts the growth of new neurons that are there to send messages to communicate to the rest of the body. Some evident health problems related to anger include depression, anxiety, sleeplessness, high blood pressure, risk of coronary disease, skin problems like increased acne, headaches or migraines, and digestive irregularities. Irregularities of brain activity. By concentrating on the asymmetric brain activity of the frontal cortex that happens when someone experiences emotions, there are two models that reverse the case of anger. The first model of emotional valence proposes that the left frontal area of the brain is involved in feeling positive emotions, while the right region is more connected to negative ones. The second model, of motivational direction, demonstrates that the left frontal area is connected to having emotions related to closeness, while the right is linked to the emotions that provoke withdrawal. The positive emotions, like joy, are usually related to a motivation of closeness, and the negative emotions, such as fear and sadness, are categorized in a motivation of withdrawal, though not all emotions behave in alignment with this connection. The process. In a nutshell, when you get angry, this is what happens. 1. Your brain receives a signal. The amygdala gets triggered into action and raises an alarm. 2. Next, the signal gets sent into the adrenal glands. They release some hormonal help and adrenaline. They also release testosterone to give you a little power boost in your anger. 3. Because of the adrenaline, you rage. The muscles get triggered by the adrenaline, and they twitch and jerk a little. Your pulse quickens, your brows and lips change form, and your palms turn into fists. 4. The rage makes you louder. It increases the speed and the volume in which you talk to others, and this causes you to become more upset too. This could blush your cheeks and protrude the veins. Chapter 4. When anger is beneficial. I also touched on this in a few sentences earlier in this book, but let me expand on this, because otherwise we might embrace the misunderstanding that all anger is sinful, and that as soon as you feel this emotion, you have unavoidably sinned. This is not the case. All the deadly sins in this book series are based on a natural human reaction, and none of them should be condemned by themselves if the person who experiences them decides to control them and, more importantly, controls his or her behavior and actions during the time they experience those emotions. For some reason, anger can make people think too optimistically. Dangers and threats seem smaller, and actions appear to be less risky. Angry people are more likely to take risks. In a test, people who sometimes became angry were less likely to suffer from heart diseases, and they were more likely to receive a pay raise. In this sense, fear keeps people from taking action, and anger can trigger taking the right actions. Anger has evolutionary benefits. It helps protect from danger and ensures survival in certain cases. Anger is also simply a reaction when people cross our boundaries. It triggers us to take action when we want to stop something annoying, evil, or wrong. For example, if someone would walk up to your wife and sexually harass her, anger would be beneficial because your protective instincts help you prevent this wrongful behavior from continuing. Aggressiveness is only wrong when it serves egotistic purposes. In cases of self-defense, standing up for what is right, or promoting good actions or getting more things done, it counters passive shoulder-shrugging, carelessness, and can, if expressed in appropriate ways, become a productive tendency. People can become more motivated when they are frustrated. It's the pain of what happened in the past and the failure that stimulates them to take more action. Therefore, projects or tasks that would have taken a long time are now performed faster and more efficiently because someone gets angry. Also, a display of anger without actually experiencing the emotion itself can help shock people who need to wake up and obey or continue doing something. When I taught elementary school, I chuckled at some of the kids' behavior. It was cute, and although slightly inappropriate, I figured it wasn't the end of the world. I was too tolerant. Then a teacher stepped up and told me to get angry. I said, "But it's wrong to get angry over something so insignificant. It's no big deal." Then she replied, "Yes, but to suggest that what they are doing is wrong and to correct their behavior, you sometimes need to pretend that you're angry. Only then will they listen to you and understand where the boundaries are. They will know that there are consequences for breaking the rules. Animals do this all the time. They rattle, hiss, puff up, growl, or do something else when a predator or intruder poses a threat. Secretly, they are afraid for their lives, but in an attempt to scare off the predator or threat, they communicate the idea of, "Back off. Don't touch me or I will sting, bite, slash, or whatever they're used to doing." Anger is a social influencer. Sometimes it's used to convince people of an idea. For example, sometimes certain events are caused by the same party who is damaged by them, just to stir up the population. Some people are convinced that the conspiracy theory of the American government knowing about the terrorist planes on September 11th is true. Personally, I'm neutral about this theory, since I don't know enough about it. But such a theory may be plausible based on the fact that they could have allowed or caused it to get the whole country to become angry, so they could justify an attack on Afghanistan. When in Rwanda, a Hutu politician was killed. The Hutu Power Radio suddenly took this as an excuse to get all the Hutus angry at the Tutsis. One may wonder, however, if it was actually a Hutu who killed the politician, just so they could start the war against the Tutsis. Things like that happen. The media does it all the time. I read an article one time about this and this gay person was attacked. They gave a few more examples of other homosexuals who were victims of petty theft, burglaries, or some form of violence, and then concluded with, "Thus we see that the violence against homosexuals is still an issue." The person who wrote this article was certainly biased, since most of the crimes against the homosexuals weren't perpetrated because of the fact that they were homosexuals, which the criminals often didn't even know, but just to get money because they offended them, or to steal or break something. Of course, violence isn't good, either to homosexuals or heterosexuals, but the writer of this article used these instances to stir up anger toward people who would persecute homosexuals. It was a convenient way of manipulating readers into drawing the wrong conclusions from certain facts. Since most people are very emotional by nature, anger is a powerful motivator that politicians use to affirm or validate their points of view. So instead of rationally talking about the consequences of immigration policies and the numbers or effects on the economy, a politician would rather point out terrorist attacks, crimes, or misbehavior of foreigners. The ones who are for more lenient policies of immigrants typically point out what they've gone through as refugees, their terrible circumstances, or the bad way they're being treated domestically. I am in no way advocating more lenient or stricter policies to immigrants in this paragraph. All I'm saying is that on both sides, with every controversial issue, people use emotional reasons to convince people, and most times it's anger because of victimized individuals or things that don't seem fair. Some gurus online in a particular marketing field use anger to show how much of a tough, hard worker they are. They talk about no fluff and getting you straight to the money and hard results. It gives them more credibility that they know what they're doing, and they don't try to sugarcoat things. It's a tough businessman act. Showing anger during negotiation processes can have certain effects too. Great negotiators may not have those emotions when they are talking someone down, but they act like they do. It's a leverage thing to act insulted or victimized, so they can back up their demands by emotional reasons. Many people fold and they give in to an angry person's demands more easily than a happy person's demand. It increases flexibility sometimes in the other person. Therefore, in negotiations, it's purely an act sometimes. Chapter 5. Losing Control. In anger, there is always a fear. Why else would we get upset? So as we overcome more of our fears, our tendencies to rage cease. One of the biggest fears people have is to lose control of their lives. In society, many people have given up their dependency on God. They want to attribute their success to themselves, always have enough to buy whatever they want, control their health, control disasters by getting insurances, control their kids' behavior, and sometimes even control the weather. Don't get me wrong, taking control over the things you can control is not wrong. We should all strive to make something of our lives and try not to be dependent on external factors. But to do so fully and completely is impossible. Things just happen. Some things just happen to us. It's unavoidable. Sometimes we counter the loss of control by raging. The fear of losing control itself can be enough to trigger people to anger and cause stress responses. Worrying, stressing out, and anxiety are consequences of a fear of losing control, or the frustration that you just lost control and don't know how to get it back. People get angry when they can't control others. Parents get angry at children who don't obey. Trust me, I do it too sometimes. They get angry at people who oppose or contradict them. And we can, at times, get angry at objects. I know one of my biggest frustrations, for example, is when computers suddenly and inexplicably shut down, show an error message, or make me lose files or work I've done. The suddenness and lack of knowledge as to why it happens or what to do about it annoys me so much that I've had destructive tendencies when I was just working on the computer peacefully. So how do we deal with situations in which we lose control? The answer is simple. Pray. Turn to God. Turn to the Scriptures. Get the comfort from the Holy Spirit that you need, and the assurance that things will work out somehow. He is on your side when you choose the right. He will help you gain back control over what you need to control. Chapter 6. Heed the warnings of the past. In the Bible, the expressions of anger clearly show different results when the emotions are displayed in different ways. For example, some prophets have simply expressed their frustration about their current circumstances, and in the Bible translation, these words come across as anger towards God. However, when we try to read between the lines, they are honestly communicating with God to figure out His will and understand His purposes, not understanding why certain things are happening. For instance, Moses expresses his confusion when he said, "Wherefore hast thou so evil entreated these people? Why is it that thou hast sent me?" Exodus 5:22. Elijah had been treated well by a certain widow, which God had even commanded himself, but when her son died, he didn't understand why. He prayed and asked God, "Hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourn, by slaying her son?" 1 Kings 18:20. Job has gone through so many trials that he probably had a hard time understanding it all too. He had lost all his possessions, his family, his friends, and his health. Finally he cried out to God and said, "Thou art become cruel to me. With thy strong hand thou opposest thyself against me." Job 30:21. Aside from these examples, though, there are examples in which God condemned anger. Certainly, the anger of the Pharisees was condemned when they encouraged the Romans to put Jesus on the cross. Cain killed Abel for reasons of anger, most likely mixed with feelings of envy. Many people get confused when they read about Jesus' so-called anger when he drove out the money changers from the temple. Let's take a look at that story. In Mark 11:15-17, it reads, "And they came to Jerusalem, and Jesus went into the temple and began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers, and the seats of them that sold doves, and would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. And he taught, saying unto them, Is it not written, My house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer? But ye have made it a den of thieves." See also John 2:12-25. We have to understand why it was so wrong to change money and sell doves to be used for a sacrifice. James E. Talmage, a religious scholar, wrote in his book, Jesus the Christ, the following comments. Quote, "While it is admittedly impossible that even a reasonably large fraction of the Jewish people could be present at the annual Passover gatherings at Jerusalem, and in consequence provision was made for local observance of the feast, the usual attendance at the temple celebration in the days of Jesus was undoubtedly enormous. Josephus calls the Passover throngs an innumerable multitude. Wars, Duo, chapter 1, verse 3. And in another place, Book of Wars, Set, chapter 9, verse 3, states that the attendance reached the enormous aggregate of 3 millions of souls. Such is the record, though many modern writers treat the statement as an exaggeration. Josephus says that for the purpose of giving the Emperor Nero information as to the numerical strength of the Jewish people, particularly in Palestine, the chief priests were asked by Cestus to count the number of lambs slain at the feast, and the number reported was 256,500, which, on the basis of between 10 and 11 persons to each paschal table, would indicate the presence, he says, of at least 2,700,200 people, not including visitors other than Jews, and such of the people of Israel as were debarred from participation in the paschal meal because of ceremonial unfitness. Inside the temple space, the noise and pressure were, if possible, worse. Directions were posted up to keep to the right or to the left, as in the densest thoroughfares of London. The outer court was in part covered with pens for sheep, goats, and cattle, for the feast and the thank offerings. Sellers shouted the merits of their beasts, sheep bleated, and oxen lowed. It was, in fact, the great yearly fair of Jerusalem, and the crowds added to the din and tumult, till the services in the neighboring courts was sadly disturbed. Sellers of doves, for poor women coming for purification from all parts of the country, and for others, had a space set apart for them. Indeed, the sale of doves was, in great measure, secretly in the hands of the priests themselves. Hannas, the high priest, especially, gaining great profits from his dovecotes on Mount Olivet. The rents of the sheep and cattle pens, and the profits on the doves, had led the priest to sanction the incongruity of thus turning the temple itself into a noisy market. Potters pressed on the pilgrims their clay dishes and ovens for the Passover lamb. Hundreds of traders recommended their wares aloud. Shops for wine, oil, salt, and all else needed for sacrifices invited customers, and, in addition, persons going across the city with all kinds of burdens shortened their journey by crossing the temple grounds. The provision for paying the tribute levied on all for the support of the temple added to the distraction. On both sides of the East Temple gate, stalls had for generations been permitted for changing foreign money. From the 15th of the preceding month, money changers had been allowed to set up their tables in the city, and from the 21st, or 20 days before the Passover, to ply their trade in the temple itself. Purchasers of materials for offerings paid the amount at special stalls to an officer of the temple, and received a leaden check for which they got what they had bought from the seller. Large sums, moreover, were changed to be cast as free offerings into one of the 13 chests which formed the temple treasury. Every Jew, no matter how poor, was in addition required to pay yearly a half shekel, about 18 pence, as atonement money for his soul and for the support of the temple. As this would not be received except in a native coin, called the temple shekel, which was not generally current, strangers had to change their Roman, Greek, or Eastern money at the stalls of the money changers to get the coin required. The trade gave ready means for fraud, which was only too common. 5% exchange was charged, but this was indefinitely increased by tricks and chicanery, for which the class had everywhere earned so bad a name that, like the publicans, their witness would not be taken before a court. Touching the matter of the defilement to which the temple courts had been subjected by traffickers acting under priestly license, Farrar, in his book Life of Christ, page 152, gives us the following: "And this was the entrance court to the temple of the Most High, the court which was a witness that the house should be a house of prayer for all nations, had been degraded into a place which, for foulness, was more like shambles, and for bustling commerce, more like a densely crowded bazaar, while the lowing of oxen, the bleating of sheep, the babble of many languages, the huckstering and wrangling, and the clinking of money and of balances, perhaps not always just, might be heard in the adjoining courts, disturbing the chants of the Levites and the prayers of priests." Unquote. Even in this chaos, did Jesus literally lose his temper? No. He simply acted in a certain way to get the results that were right at the time. He displayed anger and took action to make sure the temple wouldn't get defiled by greedy traders and conning vendors. He wanted the sacred, tranquil atmosphere at the temple to return, so people could come there, worship God, and feel the Holy Spirit they needed to get back to their lives. Many of us, however, display anger when we get frustrated over selfish things. We get impatient, feel offended, or somehow feel entitled to things that we don't have any right to. Let's learn from the scriptures and their examples to improve our own lives. In Proverbs it reads, "He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly." Proverbs 14:29. The writer also mentions, "A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." Proverbs 15:1. Chapter 7. Ignoring the Noise. Anger is all around us. Everyone is, in a way, a little angry. Everyone wants a better life, and everyone is somewhat frustrated about the limitations of life. Life is not easy. We came here to a world with problems, temptations, illnesses, pains, and damaging environments, people, and circumstances. We are all victims of the vicissitudes of life, whether this is related to another person who sins against us, or bodily functions that don't function, or the sheer fact of society being a harsh, nasty place that requires us to work hard, fail, and get little in return. Life is no picnic. It's a tough place. To give shape to this existence, people form opinions. They look at others and determine how they should live. And if they don't, then they are at fault. Sometimes these ideas are based on truth, and at other times on a mere perception of truth, or experiences from the past. The world is filled with anger. Look at the newspapers. I remember reading an article about the number of rapes in South Africa. The spectacularism of the headline, with an exaggerated number, surely made people pick up the paper and read everything else in it. Later, however, another article appeared in the same newspaper revealing another conspiracy theory that was spectacular and dramatic enough to put it in there. The numbers were off. The previous article had lied about the numbers to make the issue look bigger than it was, and even though rape was a significant issue to be concerned about in South Africa at the time, it was still not enough to these sneaky salesmen. They knew that anger sells. People listen to news flashes and think, that's just ridiculous. How dare people treat each other that way? How dare they evade taxes? Why are people so evil that they go to war against each other? They want to be angry to justify their own lifestyle. I remember watching some Dr. Phil episodes that made me feel like I, at least, wasn't such a bad person compared to the freaks that he dragged into his TV show. Politics, religions, differences, races, jealousy, competition, lies, sexual sins and crimes, money, economic conditions, and unfairness can all trigger anger in people. It's one of the strongest, most common emotions. Sometimes we are so quick to condemn and so slow to forgive and let go. It's a disease that has destroyed entire nations. How many wars and personal vendettas do you think could have been avoided if people would not think of an eye for an eye all the time? How many people who fight in wars understand what they're fighting for? How many people would not be victimized or displaced were it not for the raging rebels or army soldiers in conflict-torn countries in Africa, the Middle East, or other problematic countries in today's world? Anger can become an obsession. Revenge can become a compulsive, nagging damage to someone's mind. I know what I'm talking about. I remember how hard it was when I was victimized by a company that stole $25,000 from me. I was furious. I tried to tell everyone about it because I felt alone. I felt like I wouldn't get compensated by God. Something was taken from me and it wasn't fair. What was worse, the same company was trusted by millions of faithful customers, and there was no way to file a winning lawsuit against them. They got away with their crime, and I felt angry and hurt. All I wanted for months on end was to punish the company for what they had unrightfully done to me. It can drag on for a long time. Sometimes I felt so bitter that I prayed to God to help me overcome my feelings. I still don't trust the said company, which is smart, but the feelings of anger are fading. Time can be a great healer. Sometimes overcoming feelings of wrath takes dozens and dozens of prayers. God will help you. He is there for you. He knows you've been victimized, and He understands the hurt. And if you turn to Him, He will bless you more than you can ever imagine. I called this chapter Ignoring the Noise for a reason. The world screams loudly. Many things in life are not fair. People don't always get what they deserve. In fact, most times they don't. But we can trust in the great Creator, who is just and will compensate for all our losses in the afterlife. We cannot see it yet, but we will after our deaths. Ignoring the noise of the world means you let go of all the hatred and anger you see on the news. You don't stop caring about people's well-being, but you do stop caring about how it affects you and what you are supposedly entitled to. When someone inflicts damage on you, it is mostly their problem. They have sinned, and they will be judged for it. In a way, you could feel sorry for them. What matters most is that you keep that connection to God that gives you peace of mind. You don't want to be entangled in all these worldly pursuits anyway. You want to keep yourself away from all the selfish things your inward person is longing for. Instead, try to be like a minimalist, a quiet, calm personality in life who fights for what's right and doesn't get upset about all the things that go wrong. Ignore the noise and live your life, especially when things aren't under your control anyway. Chapter 8. A Hereditary Process. It is undoubtedly true that anger is often triggered more easily in individuals who grew up with a parent or caretaker who expressed anger in an inappropriate way. In that sense, life is not really fair, is it? We get damaged and influenced so much by our parents that by the time we are older, we have to fight against the habits we copied from them and the characteristics that have been instilled in us. I remember reading the background of some serial killers, what they went through in their childhood. It should speak for itself that murder is a sin no matter what, that we cannot excuse or tolerate such behavior, and that the engrossment of it is often enough for the majority of society to not commit serious crimes like that. But what surprised me too, although it shouldn't, is that all of those messed up individuals were in one way or another abused, belittled, bullied, put down, beat up, or sexually abused. It was like they never stood a chance of a normal life. They had learned to survive through life without getting any attention or love, and to them, it was an almost inescapable journey to do horrible things themselves. Like I said, nobody's behavior should be excused, but when we get a greater understanding of this, it all makes more sense. In Exodus 20, verse 5, it reads that God will visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate him. Why would God punish people for the sins of your parents? Is that really what the scripture means? Would God punish you because your parents, or even parents or grandparents, messed up? No, that's not what it means. God doesn't inflict that punishment on us. It's a natural consequence. When people commit iniquity or sin, the influence of that lifestyle and parenting style gets passed on to the next generation, and typically, it lasts a few generations before it's completely gone. This scripture is a prediction, not a commitment. It's purely a statement that foretells the effects of sin. Perhaps you have a short temper, and perhaps it's not your fault. I know that my father, for instance, complained a lot, and sometimes I catch myself doing the same thing. Breaking a pattern of being taught to behave a certain way can take a lifetime. The damage gets passed on. I know a grandmother who is an extreme hoarder. Her daughter, who is now in her late 40s, does the same thing, but in a lesser degree. And her granddaughter, who is now about 25 years of age, still has that sloppiness and leaves stuff around the house, although she is getting better at it. Each daughter is an improvement of the previous generation, but in each generation, other habits and quirks are developed, which will be passed on to the next one too. In a way, anger is inherited. You cannot blame your parents for every outburst you have, but depending on your own family situation, you can at least attribute some of your rage to what you've seen in your childhood. This way, instead of excusing your behavior, you will acknowledge where it came from and be able to look at it with more empathy, whether that's in relationship with your partner or from a pure inward perspective. Chapter 9. Examples of wrath. In the previous chapter, I already touched on some examples we see in the newspapers every day. I can go on and on about public shootings, terrorist attacks, revenge for a cheating spouse, homicides, riots, hooligans, violence related to racism, sexism, or intolerance, or other common occurrences. And fortunately, these are at a minimum in most parts of the world. There are other parts where civil wars continue to rage, such as in certain areas of Africa, Asia, and South America. Drug cartels, mass gang wars, and individual outbursts in homes are present in many areas of the world. And what of the world peace we have now, even in areas where we don't see as much violence? What will happen if or when essential resources like clean water, food, or electricity become scarce? Panic will arise, and frustrations may result into the same kinds of acts that we saw in the Second World War, the genocides in the 90s, or in other areas of the world, where survival is an everyday challenge. We as humans are so fragile. Like I said, as soon as we lose control, or on a greater scale, anarchy occurs, we panic, and everyone is out there for themselves. What will happen then? I don't want to worry you by these doomsday scenarios, but rather, I would like to urge you to make a decision right now to be on the non-violent side. Become a peacekeeper, someone who doesn't constantly complain or take from others. Become someone who controls his own anger. Become tolerant and understanding. This doesn't mean you have to let others walk all over you, but it's something that you do, like saying, I won't let others manipulate my emotions. I will make my own decisions based on what the most likely outcome is and how they will benefit me and others. This way, you can avoid acting on that blood rush that clouds your frontal cortex when entering your amygdala, and calm down before you do something. Chapter 10. Expressing it. In this last chapter, I will help you out by outlining some things you can do to minimize the wrongful expression of angry feelings. As I mentioned before, anger in itself isn't always a sin, but each time we are boiling up inside, we need to take control and figure out, with common sense, what the best expression of those feelings is and where they come from. Number 1. Accept criticism from others. Don't take things personally all the time. A lot of times, people are so stuck in their own world that they don't mean things personally. And when they do, why would you take them seriously? How much do they really know about you? And even if it's your own family, they might know you better than most people on the planet, but not better than you know yourself. So give them the benefit of the doubt. It probably has nothing to do with you. If you look at criticism from a neutral perspective, you might actually learn something you can improve on. Number 2. Be a courteous driver. Think of all the people who flip the bird or cut people off. Somehow, for some reason, some polite individuals turn into arrogant punks when they step into the car and drive a vehicle. Don't be that way. Safety first. Don't drive with an ego. There are no winners in driving, especially since it's not a race anyway. Yes, some people behave like idiots in traffic, either on accident or on purpose, but you don't have to play their game. There is no strength in getting even. Number 3. Avoid political or religious debates. This doesn't mean you cannot talk about these topics at all, but if you try to sense what is happening, you can easily discern when a discussion gets heated, or when people feel attacked by someone else shoving their opinion in their faces. These two topics are the most sensitive of almost every topic, and for the most part, people have made up their minds. Telling someone about what you believe in is different than arguing over a few Bible interpretations. Reasoning with open-minded individuals about domestic or international issues is different than trying to convince someone to change whom they vote for. Number 4. Overcome addictions. Craving something you cannot have triggers irritation. Irritation triggers anger. Try to stay away from porn, drugs, gambling, addictive video games, cigarettes, alcohol, coffee, and even from excessive amounts of caffeine or sugar. And try not to check your phone so often for notifications. Seriously, stay away from social media addictions. I know that every like or comment triggers a little dopamine in the brain, but please, become really social, not fake social. It's a real problem in this day and age. Number 5, don't compete every time. In another book, I talk about another deadly sin named envy. When you are jealous, it causes irritation as well. So try not to compare yourself to others all the time. It just causes frustration. Number 6, set boundaries. If you have boundaries and you let others know about them, they're less likely to be crossed. A lot of people get angry because others are crossing their boundaries unknowingly. If you set them and if people respect them, you won't get angry as often. Number 7, get therapy. If things get out of hand, you can seek help from a professional therapist to aid you in overcoming your anger issues. Note, though, that sometimes it's not always you who is the problem. I took care of a few kids recently who had absolutely no boundaries. Their parents let them get away with murder every time. So I set the rules, they broke them, and after several warnings, I would raise my voice a little and punish them. And what kids often do when they get punished, even if it's their own fault, they guilt trip you by playing the victim. In this case, I was very reserved and disciplined, but without pretending I was angry. And of course, I did get a little irritated, but still, they wouldn't take me seriously. Sometimes people say it's your problem, but it's them crossing your boundaries and behaving inappropriately. Figure out if the problem really lies at your own personality, and if it does, therapy is advised. Number 8, count to 10 or 100. Counting has helped so many times. When we are impatient, we act irrationally, and we want to take action. But counting gives us some time to cool off and think things through. We get some time to come to ourselves and reassess our premeditated decisions. We can think of the consequences of what we are about to do. Number 9, allow yourself to be irritated or impatient. Some individuals are so hard on themselves that they think it's a sin to even get impatient or get annoyed, but it's not. And then they get annoyed by the fact that they even got annoyed in the first place because they think it's wrong. I've fallen into that trap many times. Be sure of yourself. Acknowledge when something is definitely annoying. That way, you could say something to yourself like, "Everyone in my situation would hate this too." And then you give yourself a legitimate reason to be frustrated and not count it as a sin. Number 10. Look at the fear or the loss. When people get angry, it's always because they are afraid of something, or they have just lost something. It might be time, money, enjoyment, an opportunity, a physical object, an image to society, or something else. Anger is a second emotion, not a first emotion. Number 11. Emulate examples. Do you know of someone, or personally know someone, who keeps his or her cool and shows you how to go through life without worries or judgments? Then think of that person every time you can't take it anymore. How would he or she react? If they can do it, you can do it too. Think of people you look up to. 12. Repeat a calming word or phrase in your mind. Something that gives you comfort like, "I can do this," or "It's okay," or "I will be rich someday," or "Somehow it will work out," or "My family still loves me," or "Yes, it sucks, but I am awesome, so I'm going to handle this." Come up with your own phrases and make it work for you. Maybe it's something that reminds you of who you are or your successes in the past. 13. Scream in a pillow. I saw this in the Disney movie Lilo and Stitch, and I must say, it's a relief. Nobody can hear you, and nothing gets damaged, but it sure gets out some of the aggressive energy. I have done it myself several times, and it's really a nice way to let the aggressive feelings out without anyone being affected by it. 14. Escape for a moment. This means you read a fantasy book, play a silly game on your phone, or you watch a TV series. Or you can just lie on your back imagining to burn every negative place down. Whoa! If you don't actually do it, it's okay to feel like that for a few minutes. Men are particularly apt to do this. They go to their caves. As long as you come back out, it's an acceptable place to cool off. Women, if a man goes to his cave, he does so to keep himself from expressing his anger, either in words or aggression. Don't chase them and start yapping or nagging in their ear. They want to be left alone until the aggression the testosterone in their body created has faded. 15. Write down your feelings. You can write down your feelings in a diary, but if it's embarrassing or too hateful, you might just want to write it down on a piece of paper that you can shred or destroy afterwards. At least you let out your thought on paper, but that way nobody else has to read it. They may judge you for it. I've done this, and when I write down everything that is bothering me, I can complain without anyone else seeing me as a complainer. It's great, because when I look at the piece of paper with all the thoughts on it, I suddenly realize how many reasons there were for me to snap, which makes me feel that I'm not so psycho after all. 16. Talk to someone you trust. Someone who doesn't judge you for what you feel may just be the perfect listening ear you need to express your anger. It's okay if this is not your husband, who has good intentions but might not always be the best one to empathize with you without trying to solve your problem. Women are different amongst women. Number 17. Exercise. Blow off steam by running, boxing, swimming, cycling, fitness, or healthy sports. This releases endorphins in your brain, which makes you feel better. It's not good for humans to sit still all day. All that cortisol builds up, the stress adds up, and there's no physical outlet. So allow yourself to take some time away from work or responsibilities and get some healthy exercise. 18. Listen to your favorite music. This can calm you down or get you in a better mood. Sometimes it's great to sing along, and it depends on the person, whether you want to listen to something fast and aggressive or calm and soothing. 19. Watch something funny. Humor has a healing effect on us. Maybe you're so angry that the best humor is sarcasm, or a stand-up comedian that you like. I watch my favorite comedy series sometimes, just to have something to make fun of. And it works. These were my solutions. Next time you become angry and it becomes unmanageable, think to pray, to read the Bible, or to do any of the suggestions I mentioned in this chapter. Thanks again for buying my book. If you have a minute, please leave a positive review. I take reviews seriously and always look at them. This way, you are helping me provide you with better content that you will love in the future. A review doesn't have to be long, just 1 or 2 sentences and a number of stars you find appropriate. Hopefully 5, of course. Also, if I think your review is useful, I will mark it as helpful. This will help you become more known on Amazon as a decent reviewer, and will ensure that more authors will contact you with free ebooks in the future. This is how we can help each other. Here's a list of all the books in this series. They are all available on Amazon, both as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks. 7 Deadly Sins, Lust. 7 Deadly Sins, Gluttony. 7 Deadly Sins, Greed. 7 Deadly Sins, Sloth. 7 Deadly Sins, Wrath. 7 Deadly Sins, Envy. 7 Deadly Sins, Pride. 7 Heavenly Virtues, Chastity. 7 Heavenly Virtues, Temperance. 7 Heavenly Virtues, Charity. 7 heavenly virtues, diligence, 7 heavenly virtues, forgiveness, 7 heavenly virtues, kindness, 7 heavenly virtues, humility. This has been Wrath, the 7 Deadly Sins, written by Christian Vandergroot, narrated by Joseph D. Weaver. Copyright 2018 by Vincent Newt. Production copyright by Vincent Newt.